Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at another disturbing case with you. This one involves one of the strangest love triangles we've ever encountered. The killer in this case definitely thinks the solution to all her life's problems involves stabbing anyone she doesn't like. But as we'll see, this idea doesn't quite work in her favor. Sadly, Sheila Davilou's jealousy and rage would stop at nothing and no one. But during her rampage, she makes one rookie mistake that finally led to her capture. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved Annalisa Raimundo, and all those affected by this case. Stamford, Connecticut, you might not have heard of it, but it's a huge business hub. It's home to 8 Fortune 500 companies and countless other big-name corporations. That makes it the region's largest financial district outside New York City itself. But it's not just finance. Stamford also thrives on real estate, tech, and pharmaceuticals. And it's in pharmaceuticals that we find the story of Annalisa Raimundo. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, Annalisa grew up in a close-knit Filipino-American family with her parents, Susan, Renato, and her siblings. From a young age, her ambition and intellect were clear to all who knew her. She went to Harvard University for her undergraduate studies, and not stopping there, she went on to obtain a master's degree from Columbia University. But it's not just her Ivy League background that charmed all who met her. Annalisa was known for her well-rounded nature, excelling in athletics and possessing a kind and humble personality. These qualities, combined with her intellectual capabilities, positioned her for success in her professional life. After graduating, Annalisa secured a position as a pharmaceutical executive at Purdue Pharma, which is an incredibly well-compensated profession. This career success allowed her to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. She had a spacious, 2-story condominium and everything she could possibly want. Not only that, but Annalisa's professional life and her personal life were beginning to collide. In a good way. She developed a romantic relationship with her colleague, Nelson Sessler. Despite the differences in their personalities, the two found a connection. Annalisa was more adventurous and outgoing, while Nelson was more reserved and grounded. So, it may be that opposites attract. But given their professional relationship as co-workers, they chose to keep their romantic side discreet for the time being. Nevertheless, their relationship was progressing towards a more serious commitment. They weren't talking about marriage yet, but it was developing toward that. Annalisa appeared to be thriving both personally and professionally, making the most of the opportunities presented to her. Now, her story up to this point is one of achievement and prosperity, but sadly, life often doesn't pan out the way we hope for. The murder. In early November 2002, Annalisa and Nelson decided on an evening out in New York City with some friends. However, the couple never arrived at the destination. As the evening went on, friends attempted to contact Annalisa, but their calls went unanswered. 7:30 comes, we call, "How are you? How are half the 5 But we expect her to be late. 8 o'clock comes, we're still calling. We're ready for you to give me call back so we can get there." We must have called her phone 25 times, if not more, that night, looking for Annalisa. While her friends were worrying, there was something horrible taking place at Annalisa's seaside condo. Someone dialed 911 and police officers rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, they discovered a gruesome scene. Tragically, Annalisa was found murdered, having suffered severe injuries consistent with a brutal attack. The front door was open, and inside, you could see signs of a violent struggle. The victim had been stabbed in the face and beaten in the head with a dumbbell. Annalisa Raimundo was only 32 at the time of her death. Evidence at the scene suggested that she had fought desperately for her life before succumbing to her injuries. Investigators noted the absence of forced entry, indicating the possibility that Annalisa may have known her assailant and willingly opened the door. The crime scene analysis revealed that theft did not appear to be the motive, as valuables remained undisturbed in the residence. This led investigators to consider that the primary intent of the perpetrator was the act of violence itself. Forensic evidence included blood traces, found not only on and around Annalisa, but also in the bathroom sink. This suggested that the assailant may have sustained injuries during the attack and attempted to clean up afterward, which is quite a common occurrence in crimes involving edged weapons. The investigation. As is standard procedure in such cases, the investigation began by examining those closest to the victim, including her partner, Nelson. This approach is typical in homicide investigations, as statistically, a significant percentage of such crimes are committed by individuals known to the victim. Nelson arrived at Annalisa's condo while the police were still present, apparently completely unaware of the tragedy that took place. He said he was there to pick her up for their date, and that's when the officers had the difficult task of informing him about Annalisa's murder. People noted that Nelson's first reaction to the news didn't seem distressing, but it's likely that he wasn't able to register what had happened and was too shocked to have any reaction. As the investigation progressed, police thoroughly examined Nelson's whereabouts on the day of the incident. His alibi proved to be solid. CCTV footage from Purdue Pharma confirmed his presence at work throughout the day, from his arrival in the morning to his departure in the evening. More importantly, he was seen wearing the same clothes all day, which appeared clean and free from any signs of the violent encounter that had occurred at Annalisa's residence. Given the nature of the crime scene, investigators concluded the assailant likely would have been heavily stained with blood. The fact that Nelson's clothing showed no such evidence, combined with his verifiable alibi, led investigators to rule him out as a suspect. Detectives also found no apparent motive for Nelson to harm Annalisa. Their relationship, by all accounts, had been progressing positively. This turn in the investigation meant that the authorities needed to widen their search and consider other potential suspects or leads in their effort to solve this distressing case. The mysterious 911 call. Here, hello, a guy, if attacked my mover. The call had come from a payphone just down the street from Annalisa's house. She think the one attacked your neighbor. The woman calling didn't give her name and abruptly hung up. You don't know yet, hello? The crime scene was discovered because of a 911 call, but who informed the police? It's something that, surprisingly, no one could figure out. This call, made by an unidentified individual, reported an attack on a neighbor. However, there were many strange details about this call. Firstly, the caller did not identify themselves, which is not uncommon in emergency situations, but still something to note. More importantly, they provided an incorrect address for the incident. Despite this mistake, law enforcement quickly located Annalisa's residence because the door was open when attempts were made to follow up with the caller. It was discovered that the call came from a payphone near a local restaurant close to Annalisa's home. This detail was strange, as it suggested the caller might have some connection to or knowledge of the area. No eyewitnesses could be found who had seen anyone using the payphone at the relevant time. The police conducted thorough interviews with residents in Annalisa's building, but none matched the voice or description of the caller. The content of the call itself provided another point of interest. The caller specifically mentioned a male attacker, which gave investigators a potential lead. However, this information, from an unidentified source, had to be treated cautiously. Was the caller a concerned citizen who wished to remain anonymous, or could they have been involved in the incident in some way? 5 months after the tragic event, the investigation had almost stalled. The caller's identity still remained unknown, but, fortunately, after this period, new developments emerged, and the investigation gained a new lead. In the weirdest way possible. In March 2003, approximately 5 months after Annalisa Raimondo's unsolved murder, a bizarre incident occurred at a hospital, just across the New York border, about 25 minutes from Stamford. a couple arrived seeking medical attention. The husband, Paul Christos, had multiple stab wounds to his chest. At first, there were conflicting accounts of what had transpired. The wife, Sheila Devalou, insisted it was an accident, while Paul provided a more unconventional explanation. He claimed they had been engaged in a sex game of sorts, involving handcuffs and blindfolds, where the objective was to guess what item was being used to touch the blindfolded partner. According to Paul, the stabbing occurred during this activity, which he believed was accidental. Paul underwent emergency surgery and ultimately made a full recovery, but the circumstances surrounding the incident raised suspicions among law enforcement. How do you, accidentally, stab someone multiple times? It just didn't make any sense. Upon further investigation, a horrifying connection jumped out. It was discovered that after stabbing her husband, Devalou didn't dial 911. Instead, she called Nelson Sessler. The same Nelson Sessler who had been Annalisa Raimundo's partner at the time of her death. When questioned about this, Nelson eventually came clean and said that he had been involved in an extramarital relationship with Devalou. Furthermore, Devalou was also an employee at Purdue Pharma, the same company where both Nelson and Annalisa had worked. This unexpected link between the two cases, Annalisa's unsolved murder and the stabbing of Paul Christos, was something investigators needed to establish quickly. Because of this, detectives had to re-evaluate the evidence in Annalisa's case and make a closer examination of the circumstances surrounding Paul's injuries. They now faced the challenging task of determining whether these events were somehow related or if their connection was just a weird coincidence. I sat down with her. She was polite, cooperative. He came and he fed with her, and he laid on the floor, and he's like, can you look at it, see if it's wrong? And I get nauseous. I look at what I couldn't look at it. But he all someone would tell me about the deed because I already know about the deed. We were just playing the game. And that had to get at it. But didn't you? As the investigation deepened, detectives realized there was a workplace romance that had gotten out of hand. Nelson said he had been romantically involved with both Annalisa and Devalou at the same time. According to his account, his relationship with Devalou was brief, described as a summer fling, which he ended as his involvement with Annalisa became more serious. However, the true nature and depth of these relationships isn't something we know. The situation was further complicated by the fact that while Devalou was aware of Nelson's relationship with Annalisa, Annalisa appeared to have been unaware of Devalou's involvement with Nelson. Plus, after Annalisa's tragic death, Devalou rekindled her relationship with Nelson. Remarkably, Nelson claimed to be unaware that she was married to Paul during this time. No doubt the levels of secrecy and the overlapping affairs were difficult to keep track of, and as we will see later on, it created more questions than it answered. Who was Sheila Devalou? Devalou and her family are from Iran. They found refuge in the United States during the late 1970s, amidst the Iranian Revolution. Settling in New York, Devalou followed in her parents' academic footsteps, studying biochemistry and eventually securing a position at a pharmaceutical company, where she worked alongside Nelson and Annalisa. In keeping with tradition, she entered into an arranged marriage with Farid Mousavi shortly after completing her studies. However, this first marriage was short-lived, as she soon became involved with Paul Christos, whom she would later marry in 2001. Just 2 years later, she met and began a relationship with Nelson. Nelson would frequently visit Devalou's residence for their secret meetings. However, circumstances were still far from normal. To create an illusion that she was single, she would tell Paul that her mentally ill brother was visiting, and he wouldn't react well to discovering her relationship with him. This made Paul gather his belongings and temporarily relocate to his parents' house. With Nelson's arrival, there would be no trace of another man living in Devalou's home. It's surprising that Paul actually believed his wife's weird excuse, but this just shows how good she was at manipulating others. Now that Annalisa ends up dead, Davalu is back having an affair with Nelson in no time at all. Davalu's deadly obsession. Let's revisit what happened in the hospital. After stabbing Paul twice, Davalu did something that could never be explained. Despite her husband's urgent pleas for help, she did not call emergency services. Instead, she contacted Nelson and, remarkably, invited him over for dinner, while her severely injured husband remained restrained and bleeding. When Nelson was unable to accept the invitation, Davalu finally agreed to take Paul to the hospital. However, this decision came after a critical delay of approximately an hour, during which Paul's condition likely worsened. Even more shockingly, upon arriving at the hospital parking lot in Westchester, Davalu allegedly stabbed Paul a third time. This time, she nearly missed his heart. A search of her residence uncovered a cache of concerning items, including night vision goggles, stun guns, and a lock-picking kit. These discoveries were evidence of premeditation and raised serious questions about her intentions and activities. A chilling theory began to make more sense as the investigation went on. Davalu's actions appeared to be driven by an intense, possibly delusional obsession with Nelson. Investigators began to suspect that in November 2002, Sheila had gone to Annalise's home with the intent to eliminate her perceived rival. The attempted murder of her husband, Paul, months later, was another step in Sheila's misguided plan to remove obstacles in her pursuit of a relationship with Nelson. The investigation now focused on building a case that could potentially solve both Annalise's murder and the attempted murder of Paul Christos, with Sheila Davalu as the primary suspect in both incidents. The trial. In 2007, 5 years after Annalise's tragic death, Davalu was arrested and charged with murder. The trial proved to be super unusual, though, as Davalu opted to represent herself. Despite her lack of formal legal training, you'll see shortly that she demonstrated a surprising aptitude for law in court. For the most part, she challenged the circumstantial nature of much of the evidence against her. Her decision to self-represent allowed her to directly cross-examine key witnesses, including her ex-husband Paul and ex-lover Nelson. The prosecution built their case around portraying Davalu as a manipulative individual driven by an obsession with Nelson. They argued that she was responsible not only for Annalise's murder, but also for the mysterious 911 call that misdirected the police investigation. The prosecution argued the attack on Paul was an attempt to eliminate another obstacle in her obsession with a relationship with Nelson. A crucial piece of physical evidence was a small amount of Davalu's blood found on the sink in Annalise's apartment. This was corroborated by a friend's testimony that Davalu had a noticeable cut on her hand around the time of the murder. However, Davalu challenged the timing of when this blood could have been shed, arguing that it could have been from a previous, innocent visit to Annalise's home. And I was like, oh my goodness, what did you do? And she said she cut it on a can of dog food. Remarkably, the voice of the anonymous 911 caller who alerted authorities to Raimundo's plight the previous November matched Davalu. The caller had claimed to be a neighbor, but was never identified. Her defense strategy focused on the lack of other forensic evidence linking her to the crime scene. She brought up the absence of fingerprints or hair evidence, and questioned the reliability of voice identification attempts related to the 911 call. In her cross-examinations, she questioned her ex-husband about how he felt during the stabbing incident, trying to portray it as an accident or a misunderstanding rather than an attempted murder. You previously stated that when I lunged at you, I looked distressed. I had a stressed look on my face. Correct. And you have previously stated that I looked kind of crazy at that time. Crazy, angry, and you have said that I never wished harm on other people, even those I disliked. Correct? But she didn't stop there. She then tried to prove that Nelson may have been the one to kill Annalisa. You had lied to the police. Yes, I was forthcoming to the police. And what was the nature of that lie? I hadn't told them that You had been my girlfriend in the past and we had a relationship. Right, and, you did that, why? I didn't want you to go through the ordeal that I had gone through on the day of Miss Raimundo's murder. Mrs. Espa, you had a swollen red knuckle, a red mark on the side of your base wrapping around your ear, and scratches on your back neck. Not to my knowledge. After 2 weeks, the trial eventually ended in a guilty verdict for Sheila Davalloo. She was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and she was already serving 25 years for the attempted murder of Paul Christos. Should she live to 110, her total sentence will end in 2079. But this isn't the last we've seen of her. In 2017, Davalloo would be interviewed by Piers Morgan for an episode of Killer Women, his documentary series. During the entire interview, there were 3 armed guards around her, which is something Piers claims they've never had to do before. Davalloo insisted to a skeptical Morgan that the evidence was not the whole truth. Dressed in a simple red top, gray skirt, and black tights for the cameras, the Iranian-born prisoner admitted her involvement in Christos's case, but denied wanting to kill him. She also insisted she wasn't anywhere near Annalise's apartment when her then co-worker was stabbed and beaten. Davalloo's argument hinged on her insistence that traces of her DNA found on a faucet in Raimundo's bathroom resulted from cross-contamination by the police. She also denied the prosecution's motive, maintaining that she could have easily divorced her husband instead of killing him. Davalloo confessed to Piers that she couldn't fully explain her actions around the almost fatal sex game. She claimed she and Christos often engaged in consensual violence, including slapping and punching. Concluding their filmed meeting, Morgan told Davalloo that the saddest thing for him was her apparent self-delusion, as she had convinced herself she didn't do it. Speaking to The Sun, the TV host didn't mince words, calling her an astonishingly selfish, greedy, obsessive, devious, and dishonest lunatic. The Good Morning Britain host also admitted he was terrified when he met murderer Davalloo. Do you think life in prison is a fitting punishment for what she did? And do you think there were warning signs the people around her could have caught up on? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. See you in the next one.